We have two readings this morning, as is the sort of the tradition around Advent. We look at the prophecies of Isaiah and matching passages from the Gospel this year. This is the first day of the church year, and so we start the year where we look at Matthew's Gospel. So we have two readings.
From Matthew chapter 24, verses 36 to 44. When will Jesus come again? No one knows what day or time will be, nor the angels in heaven. Sorry, my apologies. Have I got them? Yes, my apologies. No one knows when the day or time will be, nor the angels in heaven, nor even the Son, only the Father knows, when the Son of Man comes. It will be like what happened during Noah's time. In those days, before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying and giving their children to be married, until the day Noah entered the ark. They knew nothing about what was happening until the flood came and destroyed them. It will be the same when the Son of Man comes. Two men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other will be left. Two women will be grinding grain with a mill. One will be taken and the other will be left. So always be ready, because you don't know the day your Lord will come. Remember this: if the owner of a house knew what time of night a thief was coming, the owner would watch and not let the thief break in. So you must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at a time when you don't expect him. Thanks be to God.
Isaiah 2, verses 1 to 5. The mountain of the Lord. This is what Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord temple will be established as the highest of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He was judge between the nations, and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat the swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, and nor will they train for war anymore. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." Amen.
May the Lord bless the scriptures to our hearts with understanding. I normally have a Bible in my car and preach with a Bible in my hand. I feel very ridiculously Methodist today because I'm using the worship book because I was going to use intercessions from it. But I should have actually taken a hymn book, and then I would definitely have qualified myself. So I asked the question, what do you hope to see during your lifetime? I was expecting a lot more. I'd love to see Australia or the pyramids or something. It's funny, in church we always jump to the Jesus is the right answer, but I guess in this case Jesus is the right answer. The passage from Matthew that was read is one of those really interesting ones where Jesus is talking about his returning, because he's told his disciples he's going and they're anxious. They're anxious that if he leaves, Does everything fall apart? Does everything they have given their lives to for the last 3 years, as if 3 years is a long time? But if you were expected to die by your mid-30s, maybe 3 years is a very long time. And so they've given a good chunk of their lives to this thing that God is doing in the world. And they worried that Jesus' death, will be the end of this thing. And so I think what the passages for today invite us to ponder for a moment is, what is God's invitation for us to give our lives to? What could we be giving? What would the gift look like if we were giving our lives as the gift? And so I start in the place of slightly mysterious and impossible to define, and probably end back around there in a closed loop. Join in with the saying, if you know it. It comes up in a lot of our communion liturgies. We say, we call it the mystery of the faith in the communion liturgies. Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. It's this stating the gospel and our hope in God's continued action without really trying to define exactly what those things will look like. Maybe even refusing to define what those things will look like. So it won't surprise you that some people really struggle with the idea of mystery, and through Christian history, we've tried really hard to define the things that we probably shouldn't waste our time trying to define. There's a lovely old gentleman in my last church in South Africa named Ken. And Ken had given his entire life to working with young people, run brigades, all sorts of things. And Ken was an engineer, I can't remember of what exact persuasion. And I was having a conversation with him shortly before I left. He was nearly 90 by that point. And he said to me that he doesn't believe in mystery. So I'm like, Ken, but you've walked with Jesus your whole life. Do you think you can define everything about God? And he said, no, but there's no such thing as a mystery. Everything can be either described and defined by science, or described and defined by God's action. And I said, well, how does God do it? And he said, well, we don't need to know that. And I said, well, so what you're saying is you don't really have a problem with mystery. You just have a problem with the word. Around the turn of the first millennium, Christians started becoming quite anxious about, is Jesus coming back? Jesus' first followers had been anxious about, is Jesus coming back? Until they got towards the end of their lives and the first generation died, and they thought, well, maybe Jesus isn't coming back in a hurry. Then they got to about the turn of the first millennium, and lots of people started writing about Jesus coming back, because the world they lived in was horrible. And they couldn't see how the world could be better, and they couldn't see what they could do to make the world better. And so they hoped Jesus would come and fix everything. And then the turn of the first century came and went, and Jesus hadn't come back. So they spent the next sort of dozen years or so writing a lot about how maybe they had the timing slightly wrong. And the millennium isn't quite where the millennium should have been because God's watch is off, or something like that. Deep within us, even if we accept the mystery that Christ has died and Christ is risen and Christ will come again, we look to Christ coming again as this quick fix for all that's wrong with the world around us. If there are wars and rumors of wars and people who suffer and violence on our streets and all the other things we spoke about, if Jesus comes, surely everything will be okay. There's a saying that's used in a horrible movie. I can't remember where the saying comes from originally, but if everything will be right, all right in the end, and if it's not all right, it's not the end. And that sounds really wise, but I'm not sure that's particularly Christian, because our hope is not just in Jesus' return, it's in Jesus' coming. So, for years, I had a bag that I'd carry around for work that had buttons on it, little badges that I collected all over the world. And one of them was a little blue badge with yellow writing on it that says, "Look busy, Jesus is coming." We can sort of unpack that idea of "look busy, Jesus is coming" in a couple of ways. Firstly, we could take it from the second coming will happen. That's what the passage is saying. If a house owner knows that a thief will arrive, they will stay up and be prepared to stop the thief. I think Jesus uses the example for a reason. You can't stay up all night every night because you will die of exhaustion. You can't be prepared for the time when Jesus will return. Only the Father knows when that'll be. It's interesting. Bible only tells us two things we shouldn't even waste our time with. It doesn't say they're not true. It doesn't say that it can't be done. It just tells us no. And the two things it tells us no is what is normally translated as divination in the Old Testament, like, what do we call them? Like palm reader type people? Psychics, like psychic type stuff. They're like just no, and then trying to guess when Jesus is coming back. Don't try to stay up all night, because the house owner will eventually just be exhausted. There's been a long-held tradition in the 20th century, particularly, that on the day when every person on earth has heard the gospel, Jesus will return. That sounds amazing and really manageable and mechanical, and like something that Ken from my old church would have written down as this is what the second coming is. We tell everyone about Jesus, and Jesus will appear. I don't think our relationship with God and what God's inviting us to is anywhere nearly that transactional. In the 21st century, there's a developing theology in a particular part of the world that if, and this has existed in some part throughout Christian history, but if the time comes when Israel is restored, then Jesus will come again. That's something of what I think next week's Isaiah passage talks about. One of the Isaiah passages that are coming up talks about. But again, that feels really transactional. In the verse immediately preceding this passage from Matthew, which I never added on purpose, Jesus says, I tell you, heaven and earth will pass away before my word passes away. So, heaven and earth will cease to exist before Jesus' invitation to us changes. Our hope isn't just that Jesus will return, but that Jesus will come, that Jesus will be present in us, in our lives, in the lives of others, in the way we use our lives as a gift. Which brings me back to the idea of mystery. Each one of us has come to faith and come to the place where we are by no effort of our own. We never paid for the chapel to be built. We've spent far too much money keeping it open and painted and clean and all of those things, but we never paid for it to be built. Someone else did that, knowing or hoping that one day we would be sitting here. We never taught ourselves about Jesus. Someone or lots of someones along the way taught us about Jesus. We never came to an experience of God just because we were lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time, but almost certainly because there was someone that we didn't even know was praying for us, spent years and years praying for us. It's not my. So the other day, I wasn't going to tell the story. The other day, I get a photo. When I asked, what would you like to see? I'd really like to see Australia and New Zealand, not because I have any interest in Australia or New Zealand, but because one of my best Christian friends, who's a minister there, is in Australia, and some of our practice children, if you want to know what practice children are, I'll explain to you afterwards over a cup of coffee. Some of our practice children are in New Zealand. And this past Easter, I got sent a photo of one of my oldest friends and his two boys standing at the altar. His boys were the altar servers on Easter Sunday. They're Catholic. Now, I say they're Catholic. Dylan is the biggest heathen in the history of the world. And I spent 20 years praying for Dylan to come to faith. And I got that photo on Easter. And I got a photo about 3 weeks ago of him with this massive, the biggest commentary I've seen in my life, and I've been in some libraries, and he's busy working through the scriptures because he's had an encounter with Jesus, and he wants to understand what is this thing he's been invited to. We are here because of people who gave their money and their time and their effort to build communities and ways of doing things and traditions that have invited us to faith, that have invited us to be part of what Jesus is doing in the world. Which brings me to that passage from Isaiah. I could speak about peace, but that's next week's preacher's problem. I could speak about a hope for a world which is better, but maybe that's also next week's preacher's problem. The interesting thing about this passage is it says they'll beat their swords into plowshares. That's one, fairly easy metal work, and two, has really good reward. If I plow and plant vegetables, I eat them next season. If I plow and plant grain, I eat those for the next year. But if I turn my spear into a pruning hook, that means I'm planting trees. And in that area, if I'm planting trees, I'm planting dates. And I'm unlikely to eat any for 6 to 10 years. Or I'm planting olives, and I'm not going to get a single olive off that tree. I'm planting it for my children or for my children's children. The passage isn't just about peace which comes out of nothing, but it's about a people who live their lives looking to the generations in the future, giving their life as a gift to people who aren't even yet born. So, some questions for you to ponder. How are you reflecting Jesus into the world around you? In your trying to reflect Jesus in the world, are you playing the long game of hope for generations yet unborn? What is the gift that you are giving with your life? Let us pray together.